This is Jackie with Idea Citizen. Today I'm speaking with Karl Hebenstreit about organizational health.
So I guess I bill myself as an executive coach, certified. For some people, it's more important that the person is certified. So I am certified executive coach through the ICF, the International Coaching Federation. I'm a PCC from that organization. I am a leadership, organization, and team development consultant. I've been doing HR and OD work and leadership development work for over 30 years, mostly as an internal.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's about the third anniversary, actually, of the launch of my solopreneurship. So I've
Congratulations.
been an external consultant providing these same types of services into different organizations, not just one, for about 3 years now. And yeah, that's what I do. I have a PhD in organizational psychology. A lot of the work I do is centered around the use of the Enneagram, especially in leadership development and team development and organization development.
When you were 10 years old, were you like, I'm going to be in an organizational, how did you jump into this? Is it like a found path that you kind of stumbled upon? You're like, I really like this. I think I provide value and I'm good at it.
Yeah, it was definitely a found path. If you ask my mom when she asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, the answer I gave was I want to make people happy. And ultimately, this is what I do. I mean, the whole point is my work is because people spend the majority of their lives and their time in companies and organizations at work. And if they're miserable there, that's not a happy place to be in. That's not good for them. It's not good for the employer. It's not good for their coworkers. It's just not good for anyone. So if we can find a way to help people understand their purpose and their mission and to find out what makes them happy so that they are happy, then the entire world benefits from that. So that's really I'm achieving that mission that I set forward for myself at 5 years old. Although I think my mom thought I was going to be a clown to try to make people happy, and I don't know if that's the you can really equate what I do as a OD consultant and speaker and leadership development coach and executive coach into that kind of stuff. But it's definitely my life's passion, and I generate happiness from it for myself. And I love to see when my clients and the organizations that they work in, they have that same passion that they find and that same satisfaction and engagement that they get out of it as well, and that happiness that ensues from that.
Have you found the barometer for organization or even member health like change over time? I mean, you're seasoned, you've been in your field for quite a bit of time. And I think that there's kind of we have like a whole before COVID and after COVID, and
Hmm.
you're really immersed and sitting within organizations. Do you feel like has that conversation changed from pre-COVID to after COVID?
It definitely has. And I think that it started actually changing before COVID, and COVID has solidified the need for the wellness and the concentration on making sure that employees are mentally well
Hmm.
and they have resources when they're not, because everyone has times when we are not mentally well. So it's how do we accommodate that? How do we plan for that? How do we support that? And that it's okay to do so. So I think a lot of pre-COVID focus was on results, on just getting things done. It's on the results, the goals, achieving
The
those
money.
goals, getting the revenue in, getting exactly the money. And then I think people started seeing that the how became really much more important. And then you started seeing performance reviews go from just the what only, like, did you get these results? Great, then you're a star performer or you get the highest rating or whatever, to also incorporating the values of the organization and to see, like, oh, how did you get these results? Did you espouse our values? Did you do this in a way that brought everyone along, teamwork and collaboration? Or did you leave a trail of dead bodies in your wake? And now is everyone hating you, right? So when you started seeing the how become incorporated into performance reviews and the emphasis more on values, I think that's when you started seeing some of that shift happen. And again, COVID hit, and then how companies and leaders handled COVID
It got
became
real
really a
fast.
barometer of, yeah, do I want to stay here? Am I being valued here? Am I being respected here? Am I being included here? So you see all the I think everything just came together at the same point. The DEI work,
Hmm.
the realization that the how is even more important sometimes than the what that you achieve, especially for long-term sustainability. And it's just that teamwork and collaboration became even much more important.
Do you feel like this how was driven by generational kind of priorities? I mean, or is that overemphasizing, I feel like, the narrative around like Gen Z, or was this, or is it from something else you think? Because I feel like, and I don't know, maybe this is one of those things, because as I get older, I think, and you notice it as you're younger, like people are talking about your generation, and then you get older, and then you're talking about the younger generation and how they do it differently, or it's not well, or it's not right. And I have to tell you, I personally am a huge fan of like some of these changes around this conversation.
Hmm. All right.
But I am kind of curious, like, because you mentioned you're like, this was already starting to change prior to COVID, and I'm just curious as
Yeah.
to why, if you know, or even
Well,
if you like would can surmise.
I think the why is the important part that you said. So I think the why became just as important as the how. So I think the focus on why are we doing this? Like, why are you asking us to put in these long hours? Why are you asking us to get these results? So that that alignment of the person's mission with their organization's mission and values, the person's missions and values, along with the organization's mission and values, became more important. Because I think looking at it generationally, I think the younger generations are looking at their parents, seeing all the hours and effort that they're putting in, and they're still getting laid off, and they're still getting right, right before they hit a certain milestone to get a pension or to get a
Mhm.
certain, you know, stock buyout or whatever it is, stock vesting or whatever it is. So they're saying this, why would I do that when there's no guarantee that these promises that were made to me are going to be realized? So I think they started asking those questions, the why, and then the how also became important because the younger generations are much more looking at the social media and the collaboration aspect. So I think that we went from a more individualistic to more collective to more collaborative, as well as so that's the how part, but the why part also became really important there. So I think it's a combination of both.
And so it sounds like you're saying, if I understood correctly, that it's like the people that are asking these questions ultimately are the younger generation, and I think that, uh, I'd say from, go ahead.
No, yes, and it
No,
is,
yeah, yeah.
and I think the people that have gone through. I mean, I've gone through 5 layoffs myself in my entire career.
Oh,
So
that's
you get to
exhausting.
learn at some point that you got to look out for number one, and you got to work for an organization that espouses your values and is going to treat you well, or go somewhere where they will treat you well, right?
Yeah. And
So
when I assume when somebody
be
like
where you're
taps into,
respected, not neglected. Yeah,
oh, I like that. Respected, not neglected. Love it. When an organization taps you to help them with building out this this new, I don't know, can we call it like this new way of like leadership, what normally ends up be like, where do you start with that? Like, I also would give credit to an organization just at all for asking the question, because I think that already takes an element of being self-aware, interest, and also,
exactly.
let's be honest, also budget. It's like, I think organizational change is not cheap, and it also requires like a really honest self-reflection on where things are today and where they want to go.
You're absolutely right. And you said the magic words. It's self-reflection or self-assessment. So understanding self first is really critically important to finding out how does this model, this system work together. So if we each understand ourselves, if we get to know ourselves, whether it's, and I use the Enneagram, and that really helps understanding with personal motivation. So what is my personal motivation? Why have I done everything I've done up until this point and will continue to do until I die? And then why is Jackie doing that? And why is Susan doing that? And why is Joe doing that? So if I understand myself first, then understand the motivations, preferences, behaviors that are likely to happen from those motivations, from my other teammates, I now start seeing they're just looking at things from a different perspective, coming at it from a different mindset, and it's equally valid. So then the third point, so this is all emotional intelligence building, right? So self-awareness first, then empathy for other perspectives, other people's points of views, and then what can I get from that that's valuable that I can integrate into my own mindset that now expands my mindset to include these others and makes me even more aware of the entire system and the way things really work as opposed to just my one myopic 40-degree sliver of reality when there's so much more that's missing. So that's the starting point. So understanding that is really critically important, and from that you can build out many other ways. And going back to what you said, you're absolutely right. Organizational change efforts. What is I think the statistic is what 75 or 80% of organizational change efforts fail because people don't consider the system. They don't look at all the different things that need to be looked at. They don't start with the why. They go right in from the what needs to change, and they don't really help and get people included and involved along the way for the how. So there's so many different things that get missed along the way, and that's why those change efforts fail. And another statistic, you could say that there's a 700% ROI when you do it the right way.
Oh,
If you
good.
do it
Yeah.
the right way and coach people and help them understand about their own motivations, why they do things the way that they do that, how they can work better with others, how they can have better interpersonal relationships, how they can get their expectations out there, how they can understand other people's expectations and how they're different than their own. That's the whole diversity aspect. That's the critical component to help you get to that 700% ROI.
I realize I'm gonna jump over a bunch of like the good like the recipe for making it, but when an organization implements just these types of changes or these efforts, at the end of the day, what is what are you finding like you mentioned 700% ROI? What does that ROI look like?
It's actual. That's the money. You have the right people working on the right things within the right amount of time at the right time and producing the results that are necessary. And sometimes, by the way, I know that you do a lot with the agile, but so sometimes what you thought the end product, the end what was going to be, is not
Mhm.
what it
Right?
was, what you thought it was going to be. It's actually something even better and different that gets even more than
That
what
makes
you
sense.
originally
I
thought.
assume, and tell me if I'm wrong. I guess what my assumption here that I'm making then is, yeah, you come in with a certain hypothesis of what it may be, but ultimately through testing and let's say maybe surveys and Enneagram. Yeah. I assume that like kind of plays into it a little bit. So all these things kind of paint a picture of, I mean, well, you start with a hypothesis and then you test, and then you're like, oh, my hypothesis is completely wrong. And like, we're actually looking at this, and this is what we're going to drive towards. And change is uncomfortable. So, like,
Yeah.
how,
Well, it's even deeper than that because if you are all coming together for the right mission, the reasons, the why are we here? Why does this organization exist? Why do we need to have this team working together? And the what that grows out of that is that what are we here to do, right? But why are we here? And then you have a set of values that everyone is aligned with and says, yeah, we are all totally understand why we're here. And this is, so we got the why and then we got the how. And then when you combine those, the what is dependent on all these different, everyone leading, going together because of the same concept of values that they have and the vision for the future and where they want to be, why they're doing this, for what's the audience or customers or clients or patients or whatever your line of business you're in. And then the results that you get could be totally different because you're looking at it from the right perspective. You're looking at it like, this is why we're here. We're all working together. We're passionate about this. And we're all doing this along the same way. We agree on how we're going to work together. And who knows what amazing things we're going to produce, but it may not be what we thought initially that we're going to produce this widget. It may not be a widget, maybe a service, maybe a different product, maybe who knows what it is. But it could be something totally exponentially different and better.
can you take me through a case study of, say, an organization? Obviously, no names or anything but something that you're willing to share about. I'm very curious to like hear like what that process ends up looking
Yeah,
like, and ultimately what the end result was in
sure.
your example.
Yeah. So there's one case study I can easily talk about. I won't give names or anything, but it's in manufacturing industry, and someone was promoted into a president, CEO type role, and had never been in that role before, and decided I need some support, I need some help, I need an executive coach that can help me to make sure that I'm staying on the right path. In addition to the, of course, the support and guidance that they're getting from their leader,
I
right?
already like the
So of course the
CEO.
leadership.
Thank you for asking that question. Let's start there.
Yes, exactly,
right?
right?
Yeah,
Realizing that's the first step, the
yeah,
self-awareness that, I haven't been in this type of position before. How do I make sure that I'm successful, right? I mean, the company thinks I'll be successful because they hired me, they put me in this job, and how do I make sure that I'm successful?
yeah.
And then doing a little bit more self-awareness building, like, have you done things the way you've done them in the past? So there's a great book by Marshall Goldsmith. It's one of the seminal works in coaching. It's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. So people keep getting promoted into positions of more and more authority and power and stature because of their accomplishments at the lower level.
Mhm.
But then you get to a certain point, and you don't want it to be the Peter principle, where you get to a point where now you're incompetent and now you don't know what to do. So how do you be successful, right? So then you engage a coach to help you to understand, okay, so this is what got you here. These are the mindsets and the values and how you got there. But guess what? Now that you're at this other level, different things are being expected of you. You're no longer an individual contributor. You have all these people that are reporting into you and expecting things from you. And how are you supporting them? And what is your new responsibility to them as opposed to your own accomplishment of the what, right? These goals, the what.
Kind of like
So
servant
now it
leadership a
was
little bit. Like you have to flip it. It's like to
exactly
your point, you're like, I was, but now like a CEO really, yes, they're, the leader, the figurehead and everything. But I like that concept around servant leadership because ultimately you're turning around to your team and serving their needs to, as I see it, kind of remove barriers, make them more efficient because ultimately you have certain goals that you've dictated and you need those
yes,
things get done. Sometimes people need help to move through certain barriers to help accomplish that.
right, exactly. So in this case study, and I'm gonna also talk about another case study where this didn't happen and the negative horrible consequences that happened
Please,
because it
yes,
didn't
thank
happen.
you. Yeah.
So in this positive case study, the leader was open to say, okay, I can't do it alone. I need to include more people. I need to develop my people. I need to give them more, empower them to have more autonomy and more decision making because I can't be around and make every single decision. Wonderful. That's exactly what you need from when you get to that level. You need to say, yes, I can't do it. I shouldn't be doing it alone. I can't do it alone. I need to rely and trust on my executive team, my leadership team, whatever you want to call it, and they need to do the same with theirs. So then involving them and getting them to be more self-aware about why have they done the things that they've done and to get to these positions, how do they understand and work with each other because they're going to be working very closely together at that leadership team level. What are they really, why are they together there? Why does this team exist? What are they going to be producing? What's the mandate, and how will they work together? So getting all these whys and hows together, then it doesn't matter what gets thrown at them because then they can just use, yeah, this is our North Star or Polaris or True North, and this is how our values. So if we just address every challenge we have through these lenses, we will get the right outcome. And they did. In the matter of 4 years, they doubled every year. They doubled their earnings.
That's impressive.
So, and people felt that they had more confidence as a result of that. They felt like they were being trusted to do more things that they had been done before. So that was a fantastic case study.
That's
I'm
a
gonna
very clear measure of effectiveness. It's like uh,
yes,
doubling revenue yearly. I mean, I think
every year.
that's astronomical and credit across the board because let's be honest too, it's like yes, good leadership helps to clear barriers, make people more efficient, but it's like leadership alone, executive management team alone cannot accomplish these things. There is interwoven web.
Yeah, and depending on them and relying on them to do, to basically not only do what they're supposed to be doing, but also expand their skills and develop so that they can grow with the company, so that they're
Can you
not
give
just
me
doing
like
the same job over and over and over again.
apologies for the interruption.
No
Can you give
worries.
me like one specific example of like what was so it's like what was something they actually did that like because I mean I'm sure it's like a number of different things and it's not one thing in itself, not one thing in a silo and they all work together, but like is there one thing specifically that you would attribute their success
Yeah,
to?
I think if you had to come up with a theme for it, not only for their success, but also others' success, it's really looking at empathy. So, emotional intelligence building and empathy, and empathizing with everyone else on the team, understanding where they're coming from, and tapping into their strengths and developing them even more. So, really focusing on that development of the team and understanding of the team. So, the empathy component, and the systems perspective, like really looking at a strategic broad view, like how does everything fit together? I don't want to just look at this one thing or this one group. How does that affect this other group? How does sales affect product management, affect project management, affect manufacturing, affect, all these different areas, because they're all interdependent. And
Yes.
just looking at them as separate entities and expecting them to have the same perspective on things is a recipe for disaster, because you're not taking into account all the diversity of the different ways and things that they're looking at differently than whatever their discipline says that they should be looking at. Right?
I don't
So,
know.
really, that systemic approach.
I don't know why this popped into my head, and maybe it's somewhat non sequitur, but I was actually listening to the McKinsey and Company podcast yesterday. They had, were they the CEO, I believe, I think it was the CEO of Bentley. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was CEO of Rolls Royce, and or maybe it was the CMO. Honestly, I just don't remember. One of my takeaways actually from that conversation was that he likes to, from a strategy standpoint, operate from a bit of a place of chaos, meaning, and I guess I feel like change kind of is chaotic by nature. And I think it's somewhat confusing and people are like, what are we doing? So, and I do think that,
Mm-hmm.
I think good things can come from a bit of chaos. And then once they're adopted, whatever that is for that specific organization, then it kind of smooths out. But initially, like a little chaos and everything, asking questions, being brave enough to also propose kind of solutions and ideas, assuming that you're an organization that allows that safety, I think for some of these things, I think is a recipe for success, in my opinion. And I think, to your point around empathy, I think being empathetic of different people and who, like let's not lie to ourselves and think that everybody's going to be a sales killer and everything. Like you're not going to ask the same thing of your salespeople, that, and going back to your product managers, to your project managers, it's like these people are different by nature. And so tapping into, their gifts, because it looks different, but it's a measured benefit within the organization and makes it all work.
Yeah. Yeah, and the chaos that you're mentioning is, we live in chaotic times. We have been living in chaotic times for a while now. And I think an old mindset that people still kind of believe is that we do things a certain way. There's this distraction, chaotic thing that happens, this change that needs to happen. Okay, great. Well, we'll implement that. And we'll go back to doing things maybe a new way, but it'll be a nice solid ground. That Kurt Lewin was the guy that came up with this theory of you unfreeze from a certain way that you're doing things based on this whatever this new thing is that needs to happen, this change. You do the change thing and then you refreeze in the new way. We don't do that anymore. There's no time to do that anymore. There's no time and there's no way that we can refreeze into doing something in a new way, because there's something else that has now come into play as well. So I liken it to a state of slush. So before, it used to be a frozen state, that we were from a frozen state into whatever happened, and then a new frozen state. We unfroze and then refroze. We never have time to refreeze, because everything is slushy, and there's another change that now came on board, and now we have to take it into consideration and respond to and react to, or hopefully even forecast. And the pieces of ice that are solid in slush, because slush has some solid pieces of ice in it, are going back to the why and the
Yeah.
how. We have no idea what
I
the
love
what's
this
going to be.
analogy. I think some of the challenges in any organization are people that are really resistant towards slush. It's like that's going to be problematic if you're also always seeking out ice and consistency and rigidity in your rules. And to some degree, it's like if things were super rigid, you probably would be replaced with a computer and it would be coded in and
Right.
programmed. But the reality is,
Exactly.
it's like, you know what? There's people that I've worked with in the past where they're so frustrated, like this is how we're supposed to do it, and it's like it's
Not anymore.
like that's a really hard battle to fight, and it's never going to be always exactly this time. And um I mean, specifically, someone's been frustrated with me because they'll be like, "This is the process, this and that," and I'm like, "I don't have the answers you need. This is the what I have today." We're also like we're
Right.
planning for something that's say a year and a half down the
We're
line.
in slush.
It's going to be a little vague. If you need an answer, here is an answer. And then in the back of my head, I'm thinking, this is going to change. But if you need an answer, here's an answer right now, just for you to feel better.
So the answers that we can give, though, the pieces of ice are, let's go back to our mission. Why are we here? And our North Star, Polaris, True North, whatever you want to call it, this is what we're trying to accomplish at the end. We don't know how we're going to get there. We have directionality, but we don't know exactly what we're going to be doing to achieve this ideal state that we've identified. And those are the only pieces of solid ice that we have. These are our values. This is how we're going to do it. This is the direction we're going in. Who knows what we're going to get accomplished along the way to our path of nirvana, right?
What happens to
But
people
that's
that are
it.
just
That's all we know.
resistant? What happens to people that are resistant or not open to kind of a path? Like, do they leave? Do they kind of self-select out? Do they get fired? Like what happens there? I mean, let's be honest, that is the
All of the
reality of of a professional environment.
It's all of the above. And a good leader will also try to understand that some people are more averse to change and some people are more welcoming to it and adventurous and want it, right? So maybe the ideal is okay, which positions are more appropriate for you where you want to experience as much change? Would this be something that's better for you? And because we value your contribution, because there's an expertise that's there or whatever it is, right? But the reality is, if they don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel valued, and that the values are in alignment, and one of their values is, I don't want things to ever change, they're going to have to find something else.
Yeah. And sometimes those people actually, I will say, sometimes those individual contributors are very good specifically for certain types of jobs because you're like, yes, you are fully, if any, fully process oriented and you need things you want and would, if anything, enforce things to happen a certain correct way every single time. So let's call it from a regulatory standpoint. That's kind of where my head goes. If you're in an industry that has some sort of regulatory arm, like yes, like you want to celebrate those people, especially in that type of role, because you need that degree of rigidity and that person that's going to hold that
Right,
line. And so there is a place for those are those little ice crystals, if anything, in the mix. It's like, no, you need, those people that are going to keep you accountable and kind of be fearless
right.
about kind of speaking up for the needs of that role.
Now, the other thing, of course, the ideal situation is that the person sees that they do need and they're open to the understanding that they need to change. And maybe it's a small change. And then you work with them and help them develop that resilience or new perspective or broadening of perspective to say that things can't be done. If we continue to do things this way, we're going to fail, right? We need to do things differently. Why? Why is this thing happening? So if you get them on board with the why, to remind them of the why and the fact that if we continue doing things this way, this why is not going to be achieved, you know, it's not going to be in alignment, they might see it for themselves. It's always going to be their decision, though. You can do everything you can to help them understand and engage in the change. And if they don't go through the change process and go through the whole, denial and resentment and anger and then acceptance and co-creation and then celebration, if they can't get past a certain stage and you've done everything you can, then it's, every person has their own choice in where they are and how happy they are.
Yeah. And I realize I probably didn't let you finish the case study. So the end result, or at least like, so the process of, you know, the process ultimately, if I'm like, there's surveying, there's roles, there's making sure people are in the proper kind of position. Once you assess that component of it, like what happens next? Or at least for this example that went really well.
So for the example that went really, really well, of course, again, constant change, right? So things continue to change, demands on the industry and the company continue to change. The really good thing that I saw that happen is every single person that was engaged in their self assessment, their understanding about what motivates them, their growth, their confidence building, their developing their people, every single person got promoted to another.
Nice.
Even when all the changes happened, they all ended up in positions where they were successfully engaged and needed and could provide additional and value to the organization in even different roles.
Yeah. And what
Yeah.
about the case
Now the
study that
flip
just
side,
crossed and like slashed
yeah,
and burned didn't work? Everybody likes a no, everybody I was gonna say like everybody likes like a car wreck, but not really. But
yeah.
I mean, let's talk about it from like a theoretical standpoint.
So the flip side was another organization where the leader thought that he could do it all himself. He didn't need anyone else, that he had all the answers, that even when he let people, his staff, do things on their own, it wasn't really a concerted team effort. It was all very individualistic. And whenever he didn't approve of whatever decision that they made, even with whatever autonomy he gave them, because they weren't a connected, systemic, collaborative unit, then he would change things at the end, which frustrated each person. They're like, well, I don't know what this is happening. We don't know where we're going. We don't know the direction. What's the strategy? And ultimately ended in him being terminated because he didn't engage in that self-reflection and that understanding of the collaboration and working with and through others and empowering them, but supporting them and bringing this cohesive team together. So none of that happened.
If I were to guess, I feel like there was also probably a lot of attrition from the team. I think replacing
Oh,
people
yes.
replacing people,
Yeah.
bringing just sometimes you need bodies in various different roles.
Yeah.
Like that's extremely
Yes.
expensive. It is extremely
I think
expensive to do that poorly.
looking back, there was at least 50% turnover on
Oh,
I'm going to call it their leadership team.
wow. And the leadership team, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a very expensive. My goodness.
Yes.
Wow.
Hmm.
And that's just the leadership
Yes.
team. I can only imagine, further throughout the
Below.
organization, also
Yeah.
the impact
Mhm.
and how much that reverberated throughout the organization. Oh, that sounds like a mess. Absolute mess.
Yes.
Well, and Carl, I know that you also work about speaking to explicit expectations, your book. My understanding is you also work with, let's call it new or emerging kind of people that are going into the management roles. So I assume that like what you end up adopting from a larger organizational standpoint, you also work with individuals for. So when
Yeah.
somebody, to your point, what you've already mentioned, it's that people sometimes are promoted into these roles where they're, say, let's call it excellent as an individual contributor, really happy in that role,
Right.
and then move into a management role. Those are two different muscles to some degree. And yes, like management
Yeah.
in theory does require a knowledge of actually doing. And I've had actually a former leader, she actually would use, she'd call herself a do-rector because she's like, I want to do as well. She does, she makes sure to keep at least her feet in the fire a little bit with like say taking on like a minor project or something along those lines just to kind of keep a pulse on like what's actually going on and not get too far removed from it. And frankly, I respected that. But then also like management and individual contributor somewhat are two different paths. And I don't always think that you need to be the best individual contributor to be an excellent manager. So how do you
Yeah.
work with people that are moving into management roles?
Yeah. So I love that terminology of a director, and I think that that's probably even more applicable when you're talking about startups and smaller organizations where you have fewer than 100 people, and then you're growing and growing and growing. So a lot of the people that were individual contributors that now all of a sudden, okay, now we're 300 people, and now we need to manage these other people. Who's going to manage all these teams now, right? Oh, and we can't hire because we have these these constraints, this budgeting, the venture capital, whatever it is. So we're going to have to promote individual contributor to who's been there the longest or shows the most promise, or maybe it's even said, oh, what's my next step? We'll promote them and make them a team leader or a manager or a supervisor or a director or whatever title they're going to be using without any training, without any. And I saw this, I think it was, I'm going to get the statistic wrong, but I think it was 85%. 85% of people in organizations say that they did not receive adequate training to become a manager.
Can I actually tell
That
you?
their
I mean, I have a
organization did not give.
sorry, Paul. No, I have a personal anecdote around this where I was promoted into kind of interim CMO role, and I think I could have done the CMO role. I ultimately at that organization, I think they were looking for a little bit more, just a little bit more. How do I say this? Not legacy, but just kind of a little bit of like more polish with like, bigger brands or whatever. So fine, no big deal. And the CEO's friend actually was like, why don't you put your name in for like this role? And I'm like, I think I could do it, but I feel like I could use a little bit of coaching or some training for it. Get this. He thought that was the most wild concept. He's like, what? He's like, training? And, you know, I think there's something to be said around, fake it till you make it. But I had expressed, at least to somebody that was a trusted friend of the CEO, that I thought I could use a little bit of training from, to your point around management is a bit of a different beast. I don't know if it was the funniest thing or the most wild thing that he'd heard all day, but he got a kick out of it. He had mentioned it a few times. They had a podcast and it was even mentioned there as well. Um, I don't know. I like when I look back at now on it years later, it's are we just so used to the delusion of people that they think that they can do everything that like when somebody's like, "Hey, I feel like I could use a little help," that we're not receptive to those things. And honestly, at this point in time, like I don't take anything personal around it, but speaking to your point exactly, I've had this experience where I'm like, "What am I doing?" Like, or you think you can do
Think
it,
of
but
it that
go for it. Yeah.
yeah, but think of it now. Think of it. Why did he think that? Probably because he himself did not get any training to be a leader, to get
Yeah,
into the
they're like,
position
just
that he was
figure it
in.
out.
He
We all
didn't get
figure
any
it out.
training or support. Yeah, and that goes back to the whole people are born leaders as opposed to do we are we born leaders? Do we develop? Do we, all that whole thing. And
What do you
ultimately, I mean,
think?
the answer to that is I think some people are born with some traits that help them be perceived more like leaders. For example, people can be more assertive, people can be more extroverted,
Hmm.
people can be more outgoing, people can be more visionary. So that could be something that's you're born with that. However, people can also develop that if they're open to and willing to train and learn and develop and get coaching, right? So it is a combination of both. Because just because you're assertive and extroverted and ask for what you want and visionary doesn't automatically make you a good leader, right? You can be a horrible leader if you're just relying on those traits and you just don't have the empathy, you don't have the systems thinking, you don't have all the other things that go along to making a really good leader. Right? So there are some traits that we value, especially in Western civilization, for
Yes.
leadership. And I mean, I don't want to get political, but if you look at elections, usually the people that get nominated and selected are the more outgoing ones, the more assertive ones, right? That's in Western civilization. And they may or may not be the best leaders because if they don't have the other values and traits and abilities that are necessary for leadership, then they may fail.
I have an anecdote for leadership, and I feel like this is a little bit more CEO specific, but it's a my theory is that what you I personally find are just at least people in CEO or leadership roles is kind of like a kindly narcissist, or at least like maybe you need to be this person. And what I mean by that when I say that is that like you have to be nice enough for people to like sign on to like whatever the vision is. And also at the same time, you have to be so delusional with just like drive to keep going for whatever it may be. And of course, I realize like we kind of use those terms a little too loosely. I think in the world, a little clickbaity and everything. But like for let's talk startups and everything, you really do need to be nice enough for people to at least like kind of tolerate you, and then delusional enough just to keep going, because I also think at the same time it's a hard path. It's a hard path, and I think
It is.
um it's a little here's my tiny violin and everything. It's a little lonely probably being at the top sometimes, but and nobody really
Totally
cares.
is.
But it's like, you know uh it's like people, I don't know, I don't think people get a lot of slack when you are on the top, but like also when you realize like within an organization, I don't know, at the end of the day, like these are just people. There's this arbitrary title placed on someone. We're moving towards, in theory, a common goal. So let's hopefully get there.
No, I think it's always a fine line. It's again, and it goes back to your greatest gift can and strength can become your greatest weakness if you just rely on that and overuse it and don't really change to whatever is needed in the situation. So yeah, that the delusion that you're talking about is that constant, this is the prize and we're going towards it no matter what. But if things change, if the environment change, if business environment changes, if there's new competition, if there's something new that happens, and if you don't take that into consideration, you're going to fail, right? So it's just, yeah, yes, we get it. This is where we're going towards, but we need to also look at the system and also be open enough and empathetic enough to our people so we don't over work them so that they
Yeah.
quit, right? So
Right.
it's just this constant balancing act and just looking and scanning the environment and scanning the internal environment as well as the external environment to see, are we on track? Are we looking at the right path? We know our why, but is there some little change that we need to make in our navigation to ultimately get where we need to go? But we need to take this new stuff into consideration too. Yeah. And a lot of times we see that in organizations. I'm going to use an Enneagram term right now. We have lots of seven thinking in the United States. The seven thinking is optimistic. It's, oh, we can make this happen. Oh, we can do this. Oh, look at this opportunity. Let's take advantage of it. And we don't give enough time to six thinking. The six is the loyal skeptic talking about, hold on a second. Yes, I agree. And this is where we miss out. Whenever we get someone saying, "Hold on a second, did we think about this?" We automatically say, "Oh, you're a naysayer. You're poo-pooing the idea. You're so negative,"
Mm.
and we discount that rather than saying, "This person wants to help. This person wants us to succeed, and if we're going to go forward with this idea, this pathway, this direction." We also need to take into consideration these things to make sure that we're going to be successful. It's not that we can't do that. It's we need to take these other things into consideration as well. And we
I
can still
think
do
that's a
it.
great point because also at some point, if you're six, if that person is continuously kind of told like, no, 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 a
Yes.
naysayer, blah, blah, then you know what? They're not going to speak
They're
up
going to shut
and
down.
they're just going to sit back and be like, all right, I'll let it roll.
Yeah.
And then
I'm
eventually
not
they're like,
valued here.
yeah, well,
I'm not
they may
valued.
leave or they see this asteroid coming and they're like, what am I? Why am I gonna say something? Like, what? It's like I
They're not going to listen.
they're not going to listen, and why would I because then you end up being the squeaky wheel. And to your point, if a majority of the population are sevens, these optimistic thinkers, then they're just not going to fit culturally. And for let's call it like say like somebody newly in a management role, like they so say you go somebody went from like as an individual contributor, now they're say running or owning a department and now they're also speaking or reporting into say a CEO or like an executive management team, or maybe they are in that team and now you're actually reporting into say like whoever the investors are or whatever that ends up look like, because let's be honest, everybody has a boss. Managing up, how I guess
Yes.
look, I have a question. My question is managing up question mark, but I don't actually know what the further question is. So could you speak about a little bit of managing up?
Sure. Managing up is such an interesting topic because you really need to figure out your manager, right? What your needs are, what your values are, what your even preferences in communication or in reward and recognition or in whatever it is. Could you might need some things that that manager is not willing to provide or is not even on their radar, and they might need something totally different. So they might think they're being a good manager by meeting with you once a year to give you performance review. You might say, I have no idea how I'm doing here. I need at least a weekly check-in at the beginning. Maybe then we can go to monthly, and then then we can finally get to the yearly in a couple years once I know what it's expected of me. And it really comes down to
A yearly
expectations.
check-in sounds like crazy to me because that is not enough.
Hmm.
That's yearly check-in, at least quarterly. I think then that's even a stretch for me.
Some leaders think that's all that's necessary because, like, oh no, they were hired, they are doing a good job, they don't need to hear it. If I speak to them, that means they're doing a bad job. But you don't know that, right? So your expectation, Jackie, is that I want more than a yearly check-in. And your leader's expectation is, I'm not getting that from the board or whatever. I'm only getting a yearly thing from them. So therefore, I'm going to cascade that expectation down to my people, right? So it's really setting those expectations and saying, okay, what does my leader expect of me? I want them to be totally, totally clear. I want them to be explicit. You know, do they want, how much communication do they want? How much check-in? How much, when do I tell them something's about to go wrong? Do I need to come, do they want to co-create with me? Do they want the solution?
Mhm.
How involved do they want to be? Because different leaders are going to want different levels of involvement.
Absolutely. And even the
So
same leader,
really
depending on
find
the
out how,
topic, whatever it is, may want different
yes,
degrees of involvement on whatever it is.
right. Right, exactly. If it's an HR issue or a issue, they may not want to know about it until it's resolved and then they know it. Or if it's an operations thing, they may want to be more involved in it up front because it may have other repercussions. Who knows, whatever it is. But it's understanding that and having the conversation and saying, what do you expect in this situation? What do you expect in this situation? Okay, what do you expect of me? This is what I expect of you. This is the support I expect.
This feels a
This
little
is the
prenuptial
communication I
agreement.
expect. It really kind of is, right? It's just let's be totally clear about how we're going to work together, what's important to you, what's important to me. So you might need to change some things to when you're working with me. I might need to change some things when I'm working with you. And guess what? When I work with my direct reports, we're going to have that same type of prenuptial agreement. It's how do you like to be rewarded? How do you like to be, do you like to be called out when you do something good? Of course, when you do something bad, we're going to have a private conversation. But how do you want to be involved or included in different meetings? Do you need time to process before we ask for a final decision from you? Or can you just say in the moment and say, yeah, let's go for it. And I'm totally on board. Or let me think about it. I need overnight. I need to, really process it and then come back to you with a decision. All these different elements of communication, decision making, anything that, your feeling style, your action style, your thinking style, how are we the same? How are we different? How do I need to work with you on this? How do I need to change to work with you? How do you need to change to work with me? So it's a two-way street. We both need to make some changes. What are those changes? Let's be totally explicit on our expectations of each other so that we don't have any misunderstandings. And when we do, because we will, how do we resolve those without the other person thinking that, well, you went behind my back, or you're trying to undermine me, or you're evil, or whatever it is, right? Yeah,
I think a
it
lot more of
really
this
is
needs
that
to
simple.
happen, but I mean, I love it. I think I believe at the end of the day that more organizations, more managers, more leadership can be doing this. Yeah, and I think it's a continual practice and it's ever changing. And
It
I guess
is.
situational leadership, it's like different people need different things. So when
It is.
when somebody is in a management role, you cannot manage every single one of your team members the same way. They have different needs, they have
Hmm.
different priorities.
Absolutely.
Can I ask that, have you, I mean, you're currently on your own. You have your book, you have
Yes.
your soul, not sole your own business, that your coaching business. Has there been a leader in your past where you've worked with them that you've been like, oh yes, like I want to mirror some of the things that you're doing and adopting some of these things for myself and kind of put it in your toolkit?
So I can answer that question the same way I answer the case study question. I can have some really good examples, and I can have the antithesis examples, of course. And they always say that when you have a really, really, really bad boss, it's great because you learn from them what not to do, right? What you
Exactly, the
shouldn't be doing
opposite.
yourself, because how they've made you feel, you never want to make anyone else feel that way either. So yeah, I have had some amazing bosses. Janet Konopka, way back when AT&T, that was back in the last century. She was great. Even before her, Nancy Vander's one at Merck was awesome. Looking at this century, I can say that Rachel Allison at Genentech was incredible, and Rich Elderkin, when I worked at Bio-Rad, was incredible.
And
So
what were
those are
there like what
some,
were some key things that you took
yeah.
from these people that you really honored?
The theme that they all had was that they cared. Their empathy was there. Their empathy, their their commitment to the success of the organization, and their sense of support and empathy, and not only support and empathy, but also confidence in me and in my abilities. So there's an antithesis here. There was another person, company shall be unnamed because people could probably figure it out. But this person was the highest level of in the organization in the recruiting world, and she actually had a meeting to motivate us 6 or 7 recruiters at the time, where she basically told us that we were all replaceable, and that was supposed to be her way of motivating us. So that's one of the worst things that you could say to me. But the reality is, yes, we are all replaceable, but how dare you say that to me?
Yeah.
So
That's,
guess
I
what?
mean,
She had to replace me.
yeah,
She had to replace me.
that's not motivational in any capacity.
No, it's not
And
at all.
when you, because I mean, you've also been at a, like, you've managed people. So, like, is there ever a point in
Hmm.
time where you felt like that you've been like, yes, I am fully in my zone of being a great leader today for this person or these people? Like, what did that look like for you? What did that feel like?
You never really get that immediate feedback, but I will tell you that years later, so I had been working at Kaiser Permanente in as a director of workforce strategy and development, and many, many years later, I met up randomly with one of the people that used to report to me, and she told me that I was the best manager that she's ever had in her entire career. And it's
That's so nice.
and I remember the yes, and I remember the incident or the specific thing that probably did that because I listened to her. And no one else had ever listened to her and taken her seriously and come up with a strategy or a plan to help her be successful. She was in this specific situation, we had 3 different levels of recruitment coordinator, and she was at the second rung. No, she was the first rung. She was first rung. She was RC. And she had some limitations based on some medical condition. And the RC1 job did not allow for that. It was such a demanding job and it needed her to be there and it needed her to be physically in one space at a certain time. And she had so much more potential. She had more education, she had more skills and capabilities, but no one had ever taken that into consideration. So I actually bumped her up 2 levels into an RC3 position where she was a recruitment coordinator, where she was like an assistant recruiter basically, and she was doing screenings, and she could do that from anywhere. And
Amazing.
the elimination of that stress had her be such a stellar employee, and then that just skyrocketed her.
That's wonderful because to see somebody in their zone, you're like, you take a bet. You're like, I could trust in you and I believe in you. And ultimately, you like that person in whatever capacity. People sometimes are in roles sometimes that are not best suited for them, that if with some minor adjustments and everything, they can flourish in their life. And you've ultimately made such a great impact on somebody's life and well-being and whatever that looks like. What would you like for people to take away about you or even just organizational development?
I guess we'll go back to what we started at the beginning of the conversation is I want them to be happy. I want people to be happy. And I think that the way that people will be happy is if they understand not only what drives and motivates them, but the fact that it's going to be different for each and every person they interact with. So leverage, take advantage of all that drive and passion and energy that you have that makes you successful, and understand that if you overuse it, it can be a weakness. And then make sure that you're incorporating all other perspectives and values as well, because then you'll have a full understanding of any situation, of the world, of any relationship. You'll build that empathy. And then if you integrate it, you'll get to that whole emotional intelligence building where you integrate all that and you will just become yourself, your emotional intelligence will just grow and develop. And when you're more emotionally intelligent, you'll have better relationships, you'll be happier,
Yeah,
and you'll be more successful.
I love it. And where can people
And it really
find?
comes down to those expectations. Really, you're making sure that your expectations are known and that you know the other people's expectations and motivations as well.
Absolutely. Karl, you're a wealth of knowledge. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. Join the Idea Citizen LinkedIn group and share this episode with a friend.